Today I have Sophie Alloway. Sophie.
Hi, Vic. Thanks for having me.
No, it's great. It's good. And thank you for being here, actually. So, look, traditional first question that I've got is, what do you do?
I hit things. I play the drums for a lot of different people. Mainly there's a jazzy element one way or another. But so I'm a freelance drummer, have been for 20 years. I do quite a lot of recording. I do a lot of gigs around London. I've toured a little bit, but most of my work's in London. And I teach as well.
Cool. Well, that sounds good.
It is. It's a nice, very nice mixture, I must say.
So what I normally do is, because I'm sort of nosy, I like to know how people sort of started off doing whatever they do, because obviously I interview lots of different types of people, musicians and artists. And
yeah, I saw. Yeah, you've got a really nice range. I listened to some in the gym today, actually.
Oh, did you? Oh,
I did. Yeah.
Right. So, what's your earliest sort of, musical or drumming recollections, or is it something that started early on? Or
yeah, it definitely started early on, because my family is musical, not professional, but there's a great love of music with both of my parents and my brother. So it was the four of us at home, and there was a great range of music played, which I definitely benefited from, because my ears were sort of open to a range of styles from an early age. And my brother was a very good pianist. I think he still would be, but that's not his focus. He designs firework displays, New Year's Eve in London, and wow. Various high-end things like the Olympic ceremonies. But
wow.
He was a very good pianist.
Yeah.
So he played a lot, and he had a classical background, but then he sort of got into Scott Joplin and a bit more of the sort of jazzy stuff. So he was always practicing. My dad had various sort of secondhand acoustic guitars, and my mum had played the piano, and there were instruments around and little percussion bits and bobs, nothing fancy, but just my parents, being antique dealers, always sort of had little things that they picked up.
Right. Cool.
So there'd be castanets or something there because they were beautiful, and they'd pick them up somewhere, and a little sort of marching drum that wasn't active, you couldn't really have played with it, but it was more of a sort of artistic piece. But I obviously saw these things, and I think my mum's brother had some drumsticks, and they were in the kitchen drawer, and we had chopsticks and various things, and I just sort of thought, this feels very natural. And this is from, in my parents' say, as far back as anyone can remember.
Yeah.
So 4 or 5, I guess. But I would say at the age of 10 or 11, I started getting pots and pans out and getting cardboard boxes and the chopsticks and just tapping along to things. So, yes, it was a musical environment. Anytime we were on a car journey, my parents would have a Beatles cassette in the car, or Dave Brubeck or Oscar Peterson or something. So, even with the Beatles back catalogue, there's quite a range of music there, and there are lots of different styles and sounds, and the writing's incredible. And so even just with that, you're already exposed to a great range of stuff, aren't you?
Yeah, you are. And what's interesting is that you've got like that sort of mix, which is it's sort of interesting actually, because I don't know how old your parents were and all the rest of it. But you
Well,
know,
they're early 70s now, if that helps.
oh, okay, yeah, that helps, because it sort of puts
They're very much 60s. You know, they were. My mum was at the Stones in Hyde Park and was at 69 when Brian Jones had just died, and she was sort of at the front there. And my dad went to loads of gigs, and when they met, there was a huge musical connection between them, which still exists. They often come to my gigs, and they're great supporters even now.
That's brilliant, because I'm really fascinated about that mix. You know, you were saying about, you know, Dave Brubeck, and obviously from a drummer's point of view, that's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, a lot of odd time signatures, but with
Joe
very
Morello's drumming.
Yeah, Joe Morello, but very catchy melodies. You know, it wasn't clever for the sake of being clever.
No,
the melodies were catchy, and I was sort of absorbing this stuff, and it makes sense perhaps that I mean, I'm not one of the freest players of odd time music, but I do get booked for things like that, because I can play it, I suppose.
Yeah, obviously you can. So you're saying around about, obviously you were intrigued by music anyway early on, but so by the age of 10 you're really trying to construct your own drum kit.
Yeah, and that was the most fun, really, that period when, you know, it was the most exciting thing in the world to go to Sainsbury's in Wandsworth and with my parents, and there's a cardboard box, I can add that. And because I am quite creative, and I was very artistic, that's gone a little bit, you know, in terms of visual art, but I did all of that. And so it was so exciting going to the supermarket, getting a cardboard box and going, I'm going to put that there. And then if I kick that, okay, that's one sound. And then I can tap this. And then, you know, all the different sounds, the pots and pans. It's a cliche, but people tend to be, if they're drawn to something like that, they'll find a way, you know, some kind of outlet for that.
Yes.
And I did.
See, I've always been interested about this at the early part of when you start to, you can see that thread that gets then sort of followed, and also because you said that you were artistic, because I think that's another thing that, you know, because I experienced this. I came to music via art. And I think that actually happened, particularly in the world of guitar. I don't know about the world of drums, but certainly in the world of guitar, a lot of those a lot of the 60s guitar players were all at art college.
They were art college boys.
Exactly. And I think
a huge number.
Exactly. And I got you know, there is something in that sort of viewpoint of seeing music from that ability of being creative and putting things together, not necessarily following the rules, but, you know, sort of taking the rules and then sort of bending them and reapplying. I think there is something in that artistic perspective of things where you're freer in your, I don't know, what do you think that's?
Yes, I do. I mean, I think those things are often connected, you know, and part of it, I mean, I've had a long day already on the tennis court at 8 a.m. and
all right,
in the gym for nearly 2 hours, and then I was just practicing drums because this is a day off effectively for me. But I've had a lot of time to think, and it's interesting to sort of go back all those years and think about what it was like being a youngster and what my influences were. And I call myself a happy loner. You know, I've got great friends, great family, but ultimately I can sit here on my own. If I wasn't working, I could sit here on my own for days on end and be quite content. And I think that background of, you know, my parents always took my brother and me to work. They had their antiques business in Chelsea. And I would sit on the floor in Antiquarius. It's a wonderful, it doesn't exist anymore, but a wonderful antiques market where a lot of rock stars sort of came through and actors, very interesting people. But I'd sit on the floor in this stand. They'd give me a roll of wrapping paper and a pen. And I just draw for hours. That's the way I remember. I was just in my own little world of creativity. And that later became playing music and having headphones on and listening obsessively to certain albums. And I mean, they weren't worried about me. I was having a great time. But there was this sort of self-contained sort of little creative spirit that they encouraged very much and still do. But yeah, it was related. Art, I ended up doing art GCSE A-level, history of art A-level as well. Even though I knew I was going to be a drummer, I still sort of did that.
So when did you know that you were going to be a drummer?
What, to actually earn money from it, potentially?
Yeah, well, but I think this is a conversation I've had with lots of different people when they go, well, one day I got up and I decided I was going to be a writer. And from that day on, I was a writer. And I think that there might be an element of that when you sort of think, I'm going to be a drummer. So it's not necessarily whether you were going to make money out of it, but that's what you were going to do.
Yes, I mean, I suppose when I was a late bloomer in terms of playing with people.
All right.
I think I lacked confidence for whatever reason to put myself out there and play in groups. Now, this is an interesting part of the journey. At primary school, my brother and I were at a lovely primary school with a great music teacher, Sheila Johnson,
right,
who was, she was a big supporter of my brother and of me as well, and anyone else who was interested. But she gave my brother a lot of opportunities to play piano in assembly, and she gave me opportunities to play a little bit of xylophone. They had, I mean, it wasn't a well-off school, but they had bits and bobs. They had a snare drum, probably with the snares hanging off. They had one of the two hi-hat cymbals on a stand and a bass drum without a bass drum pedal. But she'd, give me an opportunity to play in assembly. And I would, or if there was a musical there, I would do that, or playing recorder or flute. And those opportunities were great because, I sort of, at that time, I did have the confidence to play in assembly in front of many people. I got to secondary school and I just sort of lost that. There wasn't the same music, there wasn't the same sort of music support system. It was quite an academic secondary school. And the confidence sort of vanished for a while, which was weird. So I didn't have the opportunities to play with people. So I went into my world a little bit more just listening to albums and playing along with those at home. And then it was sort of late teens, I thought, oh, maybe I'll play in this talent contest at school. It took me ages, basically. So talk about from the age of 11 to maybe 17 or 18, I was just sort of playing along with music at home and not going out and meeting people. But that all took off later when I was doing my A-levels. I was the house drummer in a jazz jam session for nearly 7 years, which was a great way to meet.
So how did you get involved in that? Because that seems like a big leap from playing at home.
It was it was a really big leap. I think I'm trying to remember the connection. Someone rang and said that they were running a jazz course at Morley College, and would I like to go along and play some drums for a couple of people? And I did. And then they said, oh, we're starting a jam session. Would you like to do it? I bear in mind, I was still at school. I was doing my A-levels. Yeah. But my last year of school, I was doing, I think this gig was every other week. There was no money in it. And then it sort of became a £25 gig. Right. But I was paying my dues. I paid my dues for many years. Yeah. But I think my original point was that confidence didn't come for a while for whatever reason.
That's interesting.
So the point of, when did I decide that I was going to be a drummer? I suppose late teens. I thought this is a possibility. And then the talk at school of which university are you going to? I'm going to be a drummer.
Yeah.
Oh no.
I could imagine the sort of response. I mean,
well, Well, to be fair, so it was an academic school, but I wasn't particularly academic myself. So they probably thought, oh, Sophie's artistic and she is playing the drums and she seems to be good. So, okay. So they were actually all right with it.
Well, that's okay. Because I mean, from when I was at school, which I think was a bit before your time, but
it might have been.
It could have been. It could have been. But we weren't writing on chalk and on slate.
No.
That moved on. But there was a guy who was in a year below me, and he was a brilliant keyboard player, but he worked everything out by ear. Couldn't read a note of music, but he used to sit down and listen to Chick Corea and work out stuff with chicks. I mean, he was incredibly good.
Well, he'd have to be.
Yes.
I'm a huge fan of Chick. Yes.
So, but there were a lot of characters like this, that you couldn't quite work out how they managed to work that bit out, because everybody worked things out by ear, obviously, in my time, because you just couldn't get. No,
well, it's the same for me as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And somebody who was the careers teacher, if you could call it that, if there was such a thing as a careers teacher, although it was in name, it wasn't very good. Not like it is now, that things have really sort of moved on a long way.
Yeah.
But he actually said, don't be like Baines, who's just going to go and play the piano. I mean, that was the sort of attitude. I know, it was shocking.
Wow.
But I know, I think, because I think then it was like, okay, there was a recession and goodness knows what else, and I suppose really from that point of view, it was almost a case of, well, you just got to get a safe job. But of course, then within a few years, you realised that all the safe jobs weren't safe anyway, because they were laying people off of banks, the post office. There was no such thing as a safe
and
job.
all kinds of industries shut down, in certain parts of the country where that it was assumed that that's what you would go and do. Well, things gradually sort of.
So I think it was actually it was quite good that the school actually looked at that and thought, oh, this is good.
Yeah, they were okay. And I should mention one other thing. So I hope you don't mind that I don't have a sort of formula here or a plan. We're going to be jumping around. We're going to be jumping around all over the
Welcome
place.
to the podcast.
Yeah, no, perfect. I think it's great when it's natural like that. But one thing that did affect me, so when I went to the secondary school, there was a drum teacher, Stephen Hiscock, who I had some lessons with, but for whatever reason, and it's nothing to do with him, I just didn't take to the lessons. I thought, no, I want to go carry on listening to Stevie Wonder and Michael Jackson and working out what they've done or what the drummer on those tracks has done. And he was great. And he actually wrote to my parents saying, look, I really feel Sophie is quite talented and that she should pursue this. So it was really nice of him to do that. But I just, like I said, I just sort of went into my own little world a bit of thinking I'm going to carry on playing along with Stevie Wonder and Michael Jackson, and I'm going to do it my way. And then later in my teens, my brother knew of a drum teacher, Richard Coles, who was teaching up at King's College School in Wimbledon, where I've been teaching drums for 13 years now. And I had some lessons with him, and I'd go around to his house, just for a half-hour lesson officially. And as I got older, I'd be there for 5 hours.
Amazing.
We'd just be chatting, and he'd play me some CDs. He'd send me home with CDs, say, check out this guy, check out Steve Gadd, check out blah, blah, blah. And that was great for me. And he was running a concert called Soul Night at King's. And he was doing that with Paul Thomas, who's a great friend of mine, a guitar teacher who also teaches at King's. And they took a couple of us from the other school, the girls' school that I was at, and I went up there and I played drums on a few tracks at this concert. I suppose I was 16 or 17. And Marcus Mumford from Mumford and Sons was there. He's a bit younger than me, but he played drums on some tracks. Lizzie Pattinson was at my school. Her brother's Robert Pattinson, the actor. And she sang, and there were various people from our school, and we joined with the King's Boys, and it was great. I've got a video of it somewhere. And I got to play 3 different things with great people. My brother had played piano, Ben Barnes, another actor who went to Hollywood, he was singing, and my brother was playing piano. So it was a really interesting mix.
That's fascinating. That it's like you get these pockets of, when you look back, you sort of like, there's like a group of people sort of all come from a particular point. That is something that fascinated me. Somebody, in fact, there was a guy who's called Tony Buzan, who's written a lot of books about the mind, and he's the guy who did the mind mapping books. They teach that technique with these little spider diagrams for kids at school, but it's Tony Buzan who came up with that idea.
Oh, okay.
But he came out with this thing about mastermind groups that you often find get like somebody who's go, this guy's a genius, all right, or this guy's really, is an important person within whatever it is, but they wouldn't be on their own. There'd be a group of people, and it's almost like, again, we're going back to the sort of the because obviously being a guitarist, you could look at that sort of the little groups of guitar players and go, well, they all came from the same place, same area. Sort of weird. And that's not to say there must have been hundreds of guitar players all over the place, but it's just like, just that area there, and you've got that lot, So it's interesting you talk about your school with all the,
Well, see, the thing about that is, I mean, my primary school was wonderful for the music scene because Sheila Johnson, the music teacher, liked my brother and she liked me, and there was a real mix of people there, which unfortunately was lost slightly when I went to the secondary school, and I don't know if is gender involved. I don't really want to go down that rabbit hole, but the fact I had been at a mixed primary school with all kinds of people from all walks of life, and then the secondary school's a little bit more in a bubble. It's funny how that bubble actually narrowed everything a bit too much for my liking. Now, it was a great school, very grateful to have gone there, but yeah, it's just interesting. I sort of had to make my own way a little bit because the secondary school wasn't going to provide that for me playing the drums.
But do you think that could have been a good thing?
Possibly. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Yeah.
Because I think if you've obviously got that thing, as you're saying, you're internalizing a lot of stuff, you live in your own world within, that sort of artistic bubble that you can go into. But maybe the fact that you just had to do that for yourself,
it's true. Yeah, because I never feel like I've been on a conveyor belt, not having been to music college, although there are some amazingly unique voices that go to music college. And when I say voices, I mean on any instrument.
Yeah.
But I suppose the range of influences and the fact that I just kind of did my own thing, and I always have, I suppose that's quite an interesting point. Yeah. Who knows?
Because I've often thought about this, particularly, because we spoke about Sam Kelly before we.
Yeah, lovely guy.
Yes, I know. And Sam's got that sort of thing where, if you're sort of working with him, he's got another way of looking at how the music is and how he fits into that and everything. And I think that's the point, that if you bring your own viewpoint to music, which is your own experience, obviously, I think that's a very, very important thing. And there is always a danger with sort of structured education, and the guitar is a good example of this. That contemporary guitar was all over the place, but now it's becoming more and more defined, and I'm just wondering, if it's sort of lost something in that. I mean, there's a lot of people that are technically very good, but I'm not really sure, what that means about what they have to say musically. I don't know whether that's true of drums.
Well, the thing is, it's I don't want to sound cynical. It's become a huge business. There are business
right. You can say that.
opportunities for people. So all the, not just music colleges, but the sort of tech, drum tech. I can't think of all of them now.
No, there's GIT and all that stuff.
Yeah, so many places popped up because the sort of people that I knew. So in my late teens, I've always hung out with a lot of older people, and so my music teacher, Rich, would have been 40s at that point, and Winston Clifford, Mark Mondesi, Julian Joseph, loads of people who were very kind to me, and Dill Katz, when I was in my teens. There was no jazz course when they were sort of coming of age, so to speak, and thinking, I wonder if I could do this. So there wasn't a jazz course that they could go on and do it. And there were certainly no tech schools where drum tech. So, and that's changed because now everyone, it feels, goes through school and then they go on to further education. Yeah. Now, I didn't. My brother didn't.
No, nor did I.
My parents didn't. So our whole family is basically slightly quirky, wonderful, lovely people who haven't gone on conventional paths. And I think, the fact that my parents sort of said to me, Soph, I think the drumming thing, I think that'll go quite well for you. You're very much, they didn't say I was obsessed, but I was. You've got that tunnel vision with it. You're good. You're nice. You can get along with people. Just do that. Don't go to university. Take 3 years off. Get into debt. No, just they always sort of felt, go out, work hard, earn a living. And my brother and I both did that. And I'm not saying it's been perfect. I don't know what it would like to be someone else who trod a different path. But I love the fact that my parents said that. Just, you're good. Keep going. Work hard. You'll be rewarded. Well, great. I like that thinking.
Yes. Yeah. I like that thinking. My sort of thing that with my parents, my dad was a bit anti what I was doing, which is fine. But my mother was very supportive, and but of course, then it was quite precarious. How would you make a living out of that type of thing? But the point was that I just sort of looked at it and thought, well, if I don't do this, I wouldn't be happy. So I'll give it a shot and see how we go. And I think you find a way if as you say, if you've got that tunnel vision about this is the thing, this is what I'm obsessed with.
Yeah.
Then you do see opportunity, don't you? You meet people, and there is that sort of thing of. Oh, and the other point that you said, which I think is really, really important, is if you're sociable and you're easy to get on with, it makes a massive difference to whether people. You've got anybody to sort of play along with.
It can do. The interesting thing here is that I always say to people, when I was a lot younger, I was, I don't know what was going on. I was never sort of analysed. My parents never took me to someone to have anything diagnosed, but I really was quite in my own little world, and I certainly didn't go to parties, and I wasn't very good at mingling. I really would just put headphones on and listen to music, and when I was in my late teens, I don't need to get personal here, but I do credit a boyfriend I had who was very sociable, was great, very charismatic, and he sort of showed me a world where I was mingling with very interesting older people, And all of a sudden, this very antisocial, slightly strange person that I had been, I had to snap out of that at the age of 18, 19, 20 onwards. So he was sort of introducing me to very interesting people. And then I sort of, I became a lot more sociable. And so that's when it started to grow a little bit. So I credit him a lot. And that was an interesting one, because I've been on both sides of that. I've been sort of quite antisocial. And then now I love being around the musicians I work with, and it's all a big part of it. And it does help if you can get on with a range of people, for sure.
It does. So, it's a balancing act, this, because again, as you say, what you were saying is, being self-contained, you sort of, I think that's obviously an important skill as a musician, because you've got to be able to go into yourself to find that thing, how you connect with the world musically, because you have to have sort of depth in your awareness. Well, I think you do.
And if you can sort of go into yourself a little bit and analyze things, and also just being a person who it can be on their own, but because you need a lot of time to think about things. When I was obsessed with 2 Stevie Wonder albums, when I was 10, 11, 12, and then later Michael Jackson, and then all the rest, it needed that time of me just sort of thinking, right, I'm listening to this incredible lyrics, incredible musicianship, incredible drumming. I didn't know it was Stevie drumming on most of the stuff, but to just be able to listen to that over and over, and then sit on the drum kit when I got one at 11 or 12 and thinking, okay, he's doing that in 2 high and I Wish and Sir Duke. Oh, that's jazz. I realized later he's playing jazz on the drums, but it's a funk setting. But you need that time to yourself to realize a small percentage of what's going on.
Yes, you do. That's amazing. So when did you start gigging with other people, like, because you mentioned all the sort of little things that you do, but when you started working with somebody sort of consistently, or group of people?
So the concert Soul Night, I did it at King's College Wimbledon when I was, I don't know, maybe I was 17. That was great because it was an opportunity to play, what did I play? An Al Green track, a David Sanborn track, and something else, I can't remember. But it was great. And but then I went back into my shell a little bit. And then I think I was 18 when I was invited to be the house drummer in a jam session, just in Lambeth, a little pub there that still exists. And the Three Stags.
Oh, yeah.
So is it Kennington Lane? Did you? Okay, yeah. So I was, 20 years ago, gosh, I was there. And then that moved on. I think it was in that venue for about 4 or 5 years. And then it moved to a place in Stockwell. And so, we'd do a set for an hour with a house band, and then anyone could come up for the next 2 hours. And okay, what are you going to play? Oh, I don't know that. So I just learnt loads of jazz standards. People would come up and want to do some soul as well. And week after week, my parents drove me to this gig with drums. They really enjoyed it. But, I'm very lucky in that sense that they were sort of in on this, and they were keen and they were supportive, and yes, that's great. But as I said, they're still like that now. They love it, although I'm a bit more independent, but they love being involved in what I do.
That's lovely. That's good. So presumably once you're playing that regularly, you must have been a lot of people who went, okay, could you come and do this gig?
Yeah, definitely. And that's the thing, by being at a jam session, if someone came up to me on Saturday night at the gig, a youngish guy, and just said to you, have any tips of how to kind of make this work. He wanted to, you know, have a career in drumming. I was thinking, what actually happened? For me, it was I didn't have to be the house drummer, but it helped. But just, you know, having that exposure that if 30 different people come up in a night and you play with most of them, yeah, they started to say, oh, can I get your number because I might have a gig here? And I mean, I was very much learning. I was no jazz drummer, but for some reason they gave me an opportunity, probably because there was no fee. And, you know, I was sort of needed the experience.
Well, you know,
that might be part of it. If they got someone who was more experienced, they would have said, no fee, you must be joking. But I just thought, I want to learn the tunes. And then there was a bit of money. But yeah, that all started, and it led to a lot of stuff. I was also waitressing, you know, because I had left school, hadn't gone to university, and I thought, well, I even though I was living with my folks, I needed to earn some money. So I worked for £4.50 an hour at Wimbledon Tennis, serving food to people, and £5 an hour waitressing at different places. So I did all that, you know, just to keep some money coming in. And then the gigs picked up. So there was a lot of jazz, and I was doing some soul and funk as well, and then a bit of hip hop, you know, different things.
Cool. So what you've brought on board the soul and the hip hop. So who were you sort of playing along with?
Playing along with, you mean what, in my practice?
Well,
or...
no. Who you're playing?
Yeah, so various people I had met at the jam sessions sort of, you know, said, oh, I've got this gig, or it might be a function, you know, a wedding where there's a great sort of soul repertoire, whether it was Motown or the Philadelphia stuff. I love all that stuff. And then Rodney Smith, who's Mr. Roots Manuva, he was brought to the jam session that I was doing. I don't actually remember it, but I know someone brought him along just to have a look. He had another drummer. And eventually I got the call for that. And I did a couple of years on and off with him. And that was really interesting because I got to do Later with Jools Holland, you know, with Dave Gilmour opposite. Jeff Beck was there. And who else? I was sort of excited about Dave Gilmour and Jeff Beck. There were other people there. Elbow were on that show.
Cool.
Katy Perry was there. And then, you know, we went to New Zealand and Australia, and there was a UK tour, and that was good experience.
But again, it is all about that, just being out there, isn't it, and playing.
It is, and these things, you know, everything leads to something else, provided you do a good job, provided you're agreeable, you know, quite nice to be around.
Yes, always helps.
It does. And so things just sort of, one thing leads to another. And before you know it, you know, I spent years doing ridiculous numbers of gigs, you know, like there's one week I did 10 gigs in a week. You know, but week after week it was at least five gigs, mostly around London. And so you're earning money, you're playing, you're getting your stamina up, you're learning a huge range of stuff, and you're meeting people, and it's great exposure. So I did that for a long time.
I always remember reading a thing about B.B. King.
Right.
And it said that, you know, he would do like 330 gigs a year. And you think,
how many days are there in a year? Not many
that's
more.
insane. Well, obviously he must have been doing like more than one show a day.
But he's traveling as well.
Well,
You've got to factor in
just
the time.
It just sort of boggled my mind. But you were saying, you know, 10 gigs in a week.
Yeah, but that wasn't every week. That was a particular.
No, but you know what I mean. It's like, well, you're obviously doing more than one gig a day.
Well, so that was, it might be at the weekend. I remember a Sunday where I had 3 gigs, and, you know, sometimes on a Saturday there'd be 2, but there'd also be weeks where I'd drop down to 3 gigs, but it was never really under 3 gigs. That was sort of
So here's a
the
question.
minimum.
How do you deal with the late nights and the early mornings then?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Because there must be
because of the teaching primarily. Is that what you mean?
Well, no, just because I think what a lot of people forget, because I get loads of different types of people listen to this. Some people are artists and musicians, but it's just other people just sort of find me. But that's one of those sort of things when you talk about gigging, that's like, well, actually, as a player, well, that could be like 3-4 o'clock in the morning you get back, or 2
it's
o'clock.
Rare. Yeah, it's rare that it's that late. If I don't do loads of Ronnie Scott's late shows, but I have done, and I've had some crazy weekends, like before the pandemic, the week that everything shut down. Actually, I remember doing I'd have 2 gigs on the Friday, one thing in Soho, and then I go and do the late set at Ronnie's, and then on the Saturday I'd have something early evening, and then the late set at Ronnie's, and then Sunday, I think it was Sunday the 15th of March, right before everything shut down. That was one of those crazy weekends where I thought, oh, I've gone out with a bang here if everything's going to close down for, I thought at that time, a month or 2.
Yes, well, everybody thought that.
That's a good way to kind of go out. But it's tough because, especially as the years go by, I'm still youngish, but I am noticing a difference. One of the most exciting things in the world to me is getting an early night.
Yes, I know. I know the feeling.
And getting up early. Being on the tennis court at 8 a.m. this morning was really nice. When the alarm went off, it was a bit of a shock, but it was lovely, being out playing tennis at 8 and then going to the gym. And so I try to do all those things. And there are times when it seems incompatible because I need quite a lot of energy for the drumming, obviously.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you really
and that's
need the
the priority. Yeah, the drumming is the priority. And I need to be careful as the years go by, I don't get any injuries, because tennis is quite punishing, and then I go to the gym and I do weights, and then I play drums for a few hours. It's all potentially, if I'm not careful, things could start to go wrong, as they do for some people. You see Phil Collins and think, how the hell did that happen?
Well, that's interesting, because I've watched you drum on some of the videos you've got there, and you got a really nice sort of technique. You might say no, I haven't. But it's economical. It's not like I've worked with drummers who are. Well, there's one particular guy who was a great friend of mine who was like Animal out the Muppets. And I mean, this guy was like an absolute powerhouse. So he was a bit like John Bonham or Pace, But that sort of like, woof, you just felt something was happening. Now, I think that with Phil Collins, there's a lot of that. If you watch him play, there's a lot of power going behind everything. And you could think, well, as time goes on, I suppose it does happen, doesn't it? For some people. I see it with guitarists. I mean, guitarists have problems.
Well, guitar's pretty brutal with posture and, the weight on the neck. Same with bass guitar. No instrument is perfect. They all require a bit of thought. And I don't do Alexander technique, but, I make sure I go to the osteopath. I had an hour-long sports massage, which was quite brutal last night, actually. But I need to do all of that stuff, just to make sure things carry on working. But I was thinking, with Taylor Hawkins.
Yeah, now that's interesting. Let's talk about this. Yes. So what do you think?
So I love the Foo Fighters. I think Dave Grohl is such a talent, and by all accounts a lovely guy. I love listening to him interviewed. I just think what a cool dude, and a brilliant, the drumming in Nirvana was fantastic. There are great songs. And the fact that he was writing at that time, he was so young in Nirvana, and then came out with the Foo Fighters, and that they were going for a long time. But Taylor Hawkins, I mean, fantastic drummer. And but sometimes I'd watch him, and on TV there was a whole what was it, Austin City Limits a few months back, and I watched that, and it just looked like such a strain. Because physically playing that kind of music for long shows, and he looked like a fit guy. I mean, he wasn't, it's not about having big muscles, as we all know. Some of my favorite drummers aren't in the best shape, but they just, they've got that magic. But Taylor Hawkins, I sort of look at and go, it's like there's a heart attack waiting to happen, because it was such a strain. And I know he and I are playing very different music. I do rock stuff as well, but I just watched him and had a sort of fear about how strained he looked, and whether there was other stuff involved, which it sounds like there might have been. I haven't sort of kept up with the stories, but yes, it seemed he had a few substances in his system at the time.
Yeah, but I always like to say at moments like this, Keith Richards, and just leave it like that.
Keith, I've got various Stones books there on the show. I've got Keith Richards as an autobiography. I've got that for my mum, but a biography that was written in the 90s, I think, by Victor. I've got that up there. I've got all kinds of Stones books. I'm a huge Stones fan. But he, people always cite him, but he's just a very special case. He would admit that himself. That's not common, that people can live the lifestyle.
No, but I think there's a lot of, because we've had a number of high sort of notable people who became fatalities. Obviously, Michael Jackson's one, and Prince is another one.
Well, Michael Jackson and Prince are interesting because they were Jehovah's Witnesses, therefore not into recreational drugs. They didn't drink. What they actually did in their personal life is maybe open for debate, but officially they didn't engage in the usual trappings. But sorry, I interrupted you, but I always find that fascinating. Carry on. Michael Jackson and Prince. But they had, Michael Jackson in particular, had a very nasty back injury from, he used to, in his shows, that was actually my first gig. My dad and I went to Michael Jackson at Wembley Stadium in the mid to late 90s. We used to go around on a cherry picker crane, and one day it dropped, and there's video footage, and the speed at which it went down, that's when he got that back injury and then needed painkillers, never mind the Pepsi advert that burnt his scalp and started the plastic surgery ridiculous journey he ended up on. So I find them fascinating.
Because with the thing with Prince, again, there was a lot of stuff about, what he was, because he was having a lot of painkillers as well. Yep. But I think there's something in the level of medication for a lot of people that maybe, if you go back to Keith Richards, he's self-medicating.
I reckon he probably still is.
Yes, well, I think so. But
I love Keith to bits. What a lovely, intelligent, wonderful guy. I love Keith.
Well, I must say this because I lived very close to Temple Hill, which is the stomping ground of Keith Richards, right? And there's a lot of characters in Dartford. There's a lot of characters who live on Temple Hill who look like Keith, right? And they've got that mentality. And so my brother used to think, well, there must be something in the water, up here, because they look like a tribe. But the interesting thing about that is, they had and this is with Keith in mind, they were the type of people who could say something that seemed on the surface, well, slightly ironic, put it that way, because they'd hit the nail on the head in the most unexpected way, which is exactly what he does when he explains things. And you go, oh my God, that is so true. But he comes at it from like left field, which I absolutely love about listening to him talk.
Well, he's a very funny man.
Yeah.
He's very intelligent, very well read. I had a lovely chat with Daryl Jones, the bass player who took over from Bill Wyman. So Daryl's been in the Stones, obviously not as an official member, but since 1990 what? Can't remember when Bill left. But anyway, I saw Daryl Jones at Ronnie's, and I'd always wanted to speak to him. And well, I just said, we talked about all kinds of things, but I said, Keith, he's wildly misunderstood, isn't he? He said, absolutely. Because if you listen to him interviewed, and I have various books, and I have his autobiography on an audio book actually, but he's so intelligent, he's so funny, and he's very well educated. When I say that, I mean he's educated himself.
Yes, self-educated. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's just such a unique character. And I mean, let alone the writing that he and Mick have come up with. And I love Keith's solo albums as well. And I always enjoy his songs on the Stones records because they're very soulful. He's a soul boy, isn't he, as well as being a blues man. But Keith. So I had this nice chat with Daryl Jones, and he was just saying, Keith is such an incredible person and really misunderstood. He just gets, because of the drug history, people put him in that pigeonhole. He's so much more.
No, he's
brilliant
amazing.
Man. Anyway, that's my love of Keith.
Yes, and mine as well.
Good.
It's always been an inspiration. So, okay, so we got. I've just lost the track of where we were, but this is all good.
Yeah, it was probably about half an hour ago we were talking about me.
No, it's good. So you were saying, because you're saying about the Ronnie Scott's stuff and those type of gigs, and that was the point when we said about the late nights and the early mornings, right? So because if you're teaching as well, you've got to get up and look sort of reasonably awake in order to go. So how do you do that?
It's funny. I mean, I'm coffee free and I don't do caffeine, but in the last couple of years I have slipped into that a bit. But I try to eat really well. I think exercising, as long as one doesn't overdo it, I think you can acquire more energy from living like that. I mean, as we just talked about, Keith, I might as well just say, each to their own. Personally, I don't drink alcohol. I've never touched drugs. I have no interest in it. And yet a lot of my heroes, I don't need to name too many names, we all know, but they've had the cocaine addiction, which then becomes alcoholism because you replace one thing with another. Or, some have been heroin addicts, some are stoners, and I'm not judging. I love all these people very much and I respect them because they're brilliant. Steve Gadd is he's had his struggles, and it's very interesting to hear them talk about that. But I just decided in my teens, I was obsessed with the Stones and I knew what they'd got up to, and I just thought, I'm going to see if I can do this, meaning play the drums professionally and not have the usual trappings.
Yes.
And 20 years later, I'm still very happy. It could all go wrong. My brother used to joke, you'll get to 40 and then you'll the heroin and but I'm nearly there now, and there's no sign of that. So
no, that's fine. I don't think it would. I don't think there's likely to change too much.
I don't think it will. So anyway, yes, I keep running away from your questions. I do apologize, but late nights, early starts, I just try and live well, and that's my choice. I love loads of people who have a slightly different lifestyle, and that's fine. They're still brilliant. They're great players. They're lovely people. But I just thought, I'm going to be super straight. I don't force myself. I just don't really I don't fancy any of that stuff.
No, it's
Really.
interesting. I did an interview a little while ago with a folk singer called Saffron Summerfield, who was, was around. Well, she's still a folk singer, but she was in the sort of heyday of folk in London. And interestingly, she made a comment that she was very much in her own little bubble, right?
Right.
And she tells this wonderful story of being on John Peel's program, recording, and because she was with a band called Trader Horn, which were like a spin-off of Fairport Convention.
Ah, okay, yeah.
And she said they were doing this recording, and there was this other band who were on with them, and she opened the window and there was all these screaming girls outside, and she thought, this and apparently John Peel had just tried to say, don't open the window, as she was opening the window because it was quite hot, because there were all these people out there. She said, who are they there for? And he said, they're here for the other band. And she said, oh, who are they? And he said, Free. And she said, I'd never heard of them. And he said, well, they're number one at the moment. So,
right.
No, it's quite interesting. And then she said, obviously talking about Kossov, she said, he was incredible, but he was completely stoned out of his head, and I thought, yeah. And she was saying the same thing, that like she couldn't get her head around, these people could do these incredible things. She said, but, a couple of glasses of wine, that's it. I can't even do, I can't.
Well, yeah, everyone is different. Some
Totally.
people,
Totally.
if I think about Steve Gadd, who's, he sort of reigns as my ultimate favorite drummer. I'm only mentioning this because he's been open in interviews about his struggles. I think he's been clean since the late 80s, but these things always haunt people. You don't just decide that you're not going to do something and then have an easy ride. It's difficult. Right. So and because I'd read about all this stuff and heard about these things, I thought, I don't think that's something I want to get involved with. But with Steve Gadd, all the stuff of his that I love, he was out of his tree, some might say. And I don't want it to sound like I'm speaking out of turn, but his playing was phenomenal. The Asia by Steely Dan, it's sort of 2 first takes apparently. So the first section is 1 take, and the second section, they did them separately. But really, it's, first takes. And they'd had various drummers in, Walter and Donald from Steely Dan.
Yes, I was going to say, if you were working for them, that must have been, you probably needed something to calm your nerves, because they were... Yeah, they're
tough. Yes, I do know someone who was on some of those sessions. And he said, oh, I recorded Asia. He recorded it with Bernard Purdy. He's a guitarist, I know. And they didn't make the final cut of Asia, but they got Gadd in. But Gadd doesn't remember the sessions. Chuck Rainey sort of tells him what happens. But to go into all these sessions, I'm pointing at stacks of CDs I have, which you can't see, but Steve Gadd's on a lot of them. And he was working ridiculous hours. Doing all the jingles, recording sessions for, it might be Ricky Lee Jones, then Paul Simon, then Steely Dan, and then playing in New York with stuff until 3-4 a.m. That's a tough schedule. And he said it was just like one long party back then. But he got through it. He's still sounding fantastic. I hope he'll be back here. I certainly always go and see him, whenever he comes over. Hopefully with James Taylor in October, I think he'll be back.
Wow. So tell me a little bit about some of the people that you've worked with, because you've been
over the years, I've worked for a lot of different people. So so the Roots Manuva thing was interesting because I got to travel a bit, and also it's being with a rapper. He's a very interesting guy, and his lyrics are interesting, just about life in London. that was fascinating for me, because it was, you know, from pretty different backgrounds, and to do 2 years, I mean, I was still doing all my jazz gigs as well, to do 2 years of that and travel together and, you know, do live TV and festivals, Glastonbury Festival and things, that it was interesting, because it's not the music that I, you know, maybe I loved hip hop in my teens, but it just kind of happened that I was suddenly in this lineup doing these fairly high pressure gigs. And it was great. But at the same time, I was doing a lot of jazz gigs, you know, with various great pianists. And the 606 Club, I do quite a lot of things there. I still play. I think I'm playing there in a couple of weeks. So, I mean, if I start naming jazz musicians, that could be a bit of a yawn fest for people. But I've been,
not for me.
I've been, oh, really?
Go on, far away.
No, I've been very lucky, you know, to be on stage with people like Jason Rebello. Julian Joseph used to get me up at the 606 to play, and Mark Mondesi, great drummer, would sort of say, come on, Soph, come and play. Winston Clifford did the same. So Dill Katz used to book me. And I was working with a lot of really good piano trios as well. A lot of quartets with great saxophonists. I mean, Mornington Lockett was someone I used to go and see a lot, because he used Ian Thomas and Lawrence Cottle, who I loved. And Ian Thomas was very, very kind to me, can I just say. I met him in my late teens, and he just said, come round, you know, I'll set up 2 kits. And he gave up so many hours for me, which was really nice of him, for no financial gain. He's just a lovely, lovely man, and a brilliant player. You know, he plays with Eric Clapton and Mark Knopfler, and then he goes and does a jazz gig in Kingston.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, because they're obviously doing it because they love it.
Yeah, exactly, and they just want to play. But yeah, so Mornington Lockett, I'll play with him. So I've done various gigs. We've got some stuff coming up. I also do a lot of recording work. So I mean, just recently I've been recording for a new ITV crime drama that Adrian Dunbar is starring in, from Line of Duty fame. So I've been recording the music for that with Adrian singing up at Air Studios, George Martin's old place. And then here, my little studio, I do all the cue music. I'm not composing it, but I'm just recording, you know, the dramatic scenes. And then I was going up to Manchester to film the jazz club scenes with Adrian, which was great fun. He's a lovely guy, good laugh as well. So I do a lot of different stuff. Yeah, the recording
brilliant.
Great. And, you know, I was doing a Radio 3 session with Yaz Ahmed recently, and then we went and did Ronnie Scott's. So, yeah, I mean, loads of, there's also a band, the Lydian Collective, I've been playing with for about 8 years. So original fusion stuff. Our new album's coming out, when is it, in May the 25th, I think. Let me just have a look in the Book of Destiny. No, May the 27th, our first album's there, record. And with Wildcard, I've been recording. We've got another album coming out soon. So, and I'm doing a project with Jay Rayner, the food critic and MasterChef guy and journalist. He plays piano. So we've been doing some stuff. And Lee John, the soul singer from Imagination, I did my first gig with him last Friday. So there's been a lot going on.
That sounds brilliant.
Sort of going from one thing to the other, you know, rushing down to play with Jay Rayner after filming with Adrian Dunbar, and then you know, the next morning I'm with Lee John, the soul singer, and so there's been a lot happening. I've done recordings with Hazel O'Connor, and, you know, just different stuff over the years.
Sounds great, because again, if you think back to when you were sort of thinking, actually, I could be a drummer. You would never have thought then. would you?
Well, you have different thoughts. I'm
course you
sure
do.
you get
Yeah.
this. I had thoughts. I'd listen to Dave Weckl play, or I'd go to see Dave Weckl at Ronnie Scott's when I was 18 or 19 and think, well, if I practice for a year, I reckon I'll have all that stuff down. And, 20 years later, I'm floored by Dave Weckl. I think he's phenomenal. And I'm nowhere near, but I have my own thing. We all have something to offer.
That's right.
Yeah, I'm very grateful that I grew up in London, that my parents live in London, and I was able to live with them for a very long time, shall we say, while I worked, and there's a lot of luck involved and having a nice support unit, but I've also worked incredibly hard. There's no disputing that. I've paid my dues. I've done ridiculous numbers of gigs. I'm very dedicated. So we make our own luck, but being in London has been a big plus for me. So I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, I think that's a good point to stop there. I'll put your website details and everything in the show.
Oh yeah, I should probably update that. It's been about a year.
Oh, okay.
And a lot has happened in that year, but I just haven't updated it.
Okay, well, do that. So thanks ever so much, Sophie. It's really, really
Thanks, good. Vic. Great to speak to you.
Yeah,
Thank you for making it happen, and to Sam for
it's good old Sam.
It. Good old Sam. That boy's all right.
He is. Thanks ever so much.
You're welcome. Thanks, Vic. Great to talk to you.
Speak to you soon. So thanks to Sophie. You can reach her on the show notes. Links will be on there. Also, all the stuff to do with the Patreon, all the NLP stuff that I do, the sort of coaching, getting people playing music and songwriting, and just sorting your life out, really. And then, of course, there's the Icaro Music Charity stuff. So I'm obviously working with a group of kids online and in person, teaching songwriting and play, which is always good fun and really rewarding. So if you want to check that out, you know where to go. So until next time, I'll see you then. Bye.